Hello and welcome to In the Newsroom, a production in partnership with Studio Stillwater. I'm Stillwater News Press editor Bo Simmons. With me today, news editor Tanner Hollabar.
How's it going?
City editor Michelle Charles.
Hello.
And reporter Ashlyn Huffman.
Oh, hi. She's silent.
Or is this sass? She said she's extra sassy today.
She's always a little sassy, but...
If there's a word in our newsroom we probably overuse, it's probably sass or sassy.
That is true.
It doesn't make it into our reporting, but it's...
No. We try to keep it out of the reporting.
Yeah. Very sassy. Okay. Quiet. I don't know. I don't think you can be quiet and sassy, but maybe you can. Sassy's an attitude, right? It doesn't have to come through in your words.
I would say Ashlyn gives a lot of quiet sass.
Sassive aggressive?
Yes, very good. I like that.
Pun intended.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
Had to get that one out there.
That was a good one. I'm going to remember that one.
Sassive, aggressive. Okay. I always forget how we want to time things. So I would say last week, knowing when this comes out, looking at last week. But for us, it's sort of the current week, heading into the weekend. Michelle looked at a lot, kind of one of those sort of city council meetings where they, cram a lot of stuff into it and things that affect a lot of people. What were the main things you pulled out of what they're doing on council?
Well, the main things I've pulled out so far this week are just a general budget overview, which is, the thing is when you deal with government entities, you're always talking about budget. You're always somewhere in the budget cycle. It's just like the life cycle or the water cycle. It's continuous. You're either preparing the budget or you're amending the budget or you're finalizing the budget or you're getting ready for the next budget. And they run on fiscal years, which run July 1 through the end of June. So it's a little bit different, again, than most people's timetables. Some folks don't realize that. Anyway, City of Stillwater is definitely working on trying to finalize its budget, trying to get that done by mid-May because it has to be in place before July 1.
Yeah, this moves you from July 1 through June 2021, 22.
Right. And so we're already looking at fiscal year 2022.
I'm curious about that, maybe not even more the nitty-gritty stuff, is, they've had this push to get people involved, a lot of the community feedback, a lot of surveys, tell us how you would do the budget, and they have these tools online.
Sure.
Do they get the feedback they want, or have they been successful at all? Do you know what the community response is for something like that?
Well, I would say based on the reports that they give in the city council meeting, they feel like the budget balancing tool that they have. But anyway, there's a little app basically embedded in their website where you can go on there and you can say, okay, you have this much money. What would you spend it on? And it's a way for people to show their priorities. But my personal opinion is it's also a way to educate the public about how hard it is to do a budget and how expensive things are and how when you put more money somewhere, you got to take it away somewhere else. And it's a way of getting the public to realize, okay, you say you want the streets just fixed. But if we took every free dollar and put it on streets, there's literally nothing left for anything else. I think it's also a public education tool. But they seem to be fairly satisfied with, with the level of feedback they're getting there. I think engagement always needs to be higher. Their public meetings, their budget fairs and things that they've had in the past have not worked well. I've gone to them and they've been very, very sad affairs where you have a whole bunch of city employees sitting there at various stations in the gymnasium area at the Stillwater Community Center. And there are like 5 members of the public, and 3 of them are people you probably see at city council meetings regularly anyway, talking to their friends who work for the city. It's really not, it's been a challenge, right, to get people excited about it. I think when you're talking about city government generally, and Chris and I figured this out as we were doing the discussions with the various candidates for city council and school board and everything, people don't always get that engaged when they're pretty satisfied with the way things are going. It's like when something big is happening that is ruffling their feathers, that's when they get involved. That's when they start looking at things and paying attention. And so, when things were a little bit easier, when, people just kind of, I guess pre-COVID anyway, I think, a lot of people were kind of on autopilot. I hope moving forward that more people will be engaged. But having said that, are they going to be engaged on the budget until they figure out that their priority hasn't been funded to the level that they like? I don't know. That's a really good question. I will say this. The city is, the revenues have not been as bad as they thought they were going to be. They are still budgeting for about $3 million less than they had in the last fiscal year. But they did have some one-time funds. They had some CARES Act funding. They had some different things like that. So some of that will be reflected in those revenues as well. The city gets about half of its, actually more than that, like 62%, I think, was what I added up. They're projecting to get 62% of their revenues from utility sales, whether it's electricity, water, wastewater, trash pickup.
Has the latest CARES Act funding, for municipalities, did that go into like last month, or is that still
I don't think they
something
know
in the
how much they're
budget,
going to get.
So that's still something
that'll be a budget amendment. So, it's
coming
possible.
forward,
Well, it's possible that they will wind up with more money for infrastructure, I think is what everyone's really hoping, is that they'll have a couple $1 million extra to throw at transportation projects, which would be swell. I mean, I think the whole, the community would pretty much rejoice at that. But overall, what they're budgeting for right now is about $3 million less. But what they're doing is they're allocating it a little bit differently. When I looked at the actual spreadsheets that they put out, they're actually taking more of that money and putting it toward capital projects, or specifically in infrastructure and certain types of building, and taking it away from the stuff that you might have called overhead previously. I mean, like, administrative costs, basically.
Sure.
They're kind of cutting that. I think they've, had some positions that have been open for a while, saved some money. And, they've just been consistently streamlining that over the years.
Attrition, and if someone leaves a position, they don't fill it, and
not right away. I mean,
take that out of the budget. I don't know.
Well, over the last several years, the city's actually trimmed about 100 employees off its payroll. At one time they had about 650, and now they're at around 550. But they've outsourced some things. I mean, like the mowing for city facilities and things like that. Those used to be Parks Department employees who had to do things like that.
Well, yeah, payroll is one of the biggest expenses, right?
Right.
Right up there.
Well, you can add at least, 30% of the salary for benefits to that. So anyway, yeah, it's a big expense. And actually personnel is the biggest expense the city has. So they get most of their money from utility sales. They spend most of their money on personnel. Anyway, so that's what we're looking at in terms of budget.
Tanner, what would you do with that? How would you, if you were playing with that budget app, right?
Yes.
What is that? It gives you you're like a dial, you're moving for percentages.
I think so.
Maybe better streamline the stoplight concept.
Oh.
You seem to get stopped at every single one of them, or you go through every single one of them. I don't know. That's just one thing that I personally would improve in some form or fashion. Either that it recognizes that there's nobody sitting there waiting to go, so that it doesn't need to stop. That happens several times, several different lights. You stop and there's nobody coming, especially late at night, leaving work here. So
yeah, I'm sure you see that more than most people, right?
At least, something that comes to mind, at least sort of, there's not really flashing red lights at any point during the night in Stillwater. So
true. And traffic light phasing is something that a lot of people do talk about as well. I mean, I will say though that on certain roads, they're stopping you every so often for a reason. They don't want you to build up too much speed.
Right, exactly.
On these roads as you're going through town, because otherwise people could be like, I'm on a highway. I'm going to drive 50 miles an hour, but I'm going through town.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the major intersections, I would say, are pretty good. I really like the stoplight area they have right there on 6th and Perkins right there. You have
the newest one.
The newest one, just because you have that right turn lane. It's never really clogged up. You're never, so that one at least seems to move pretty quickly. So,
and I think as they're redesigning, because they're going to rework that intersection at McElroy and Perkins Road too. And I think that's part of the thing is that seems to be the thing is like, how do you keep traffic flowing, keep it from backing up? So
right.
I think you're going to see a lot of improvements on Perkins Road.
Right, and that's another thing. We're trying to turn left on Perkins on McElroy. You might have to wait through 3 cycles of that light just to turn left. Because maybe it's only just because there's so many people waiting to turn left there.
Sure.
So it's just, I don't know. That would just be one thing that off the top of my head, just maybe if there was a way to maybe kind of improve that at certain spots, or I don't know.
Well, and it at Main or at Perkins Road in Maine, they you have the option of having that second turn lane, so you can go straight or you can turn depending on the traffic flow and what's going on. So
traffic, roads.
I know it's a big deal. I mean, it really
stormwater draining. Does that come up a lot? That's always me, but
they
tell
a big
when
deal.
they want to deal with the stormwater. We're told that's a much higher expense. That's an entire rebuild, right? They got to tear everything up to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, our streets are meant to serve as drainage channels. So they're sort of designed to fill up with water to a certain degree, which doesn't always work well. I mean, and you have certain areas where we have creeks. We've got a creek that runs through town, and that, so there you've got certain areas that tend to flood, lower lying areas.
I don't think you can say now, because, none of us can really predict the weather, but you can't say now that the kind of flood we had 2 years ago is just a one-off historic flood.
No.
I think climate science is going to tell you that, storms are coming more often, and the rain is what did the climatologist tell you that one time? The rain is actually harder or something. I don't even know.
Remember
like how he put it. Like
it's like more intense.
You're getting
like
more intense rain in a short amount of time.
Yes.
It's like we're getting more of that stuff. So
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they call these 100-year events.
Yeah.
But they don't happen every 100 years. It doesn't mean we're good for 99 more years. That's not actually how that works. It's a little bit of a misnomer, or it doesn't really explain the concept adequately.
So that's that's where I'd put it. What about you, Ashlyn?
I'm very confused. I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
You don't know what you'd prioritize on a city budget?
I don't even know what a city budget is.
Sass. All right. What else? Michelle, you looked into the housing a little bit, but you also did that for Progress. And then we had Mark's, our correspondent Mark, had a story about new housing developments just outside of city limits.
Yes, there's another one happening at 44th in Jardeau. And the county commission had to approve some road names. The county commission has to approve the road names, the plats, the things like that, but they do not maintain the roads for anything that is not a current county road. But there's a new addition going in with like 76 parcels of land, 76 lots. So that's 76 more units that will be built near Stillwater. And that's something that when City Manager Norman McNichol spoke to the Stillwater Board of Realtors recently, and I that did work its way into my story on housing for Progress Magazine, which is coming out, that we've got like 400 and some new housing starts within the city limits, and more than 100 more very close to the city limits. So this is good news for people who have been kind of struggling to get into the housing market. It all kind of depends on the price point, right? I mean, when you talk about starter homes, what I think of as a starter home is probably under $150,000. Some other people might define it as $250,000 or less, which sounds like so much money. I mean, just the idea of buying something that costs more than $100,000 should freak most people out, I think.
Well, and I would think, and if you're trying to be a new homeowner, young professional, whatever, or someone who's, just been saving for a while, you're kind of looking for a mortgage payment that is, less than what a crazy rent would be for something similar. You have to have something you can cover what I can't remember what they said, based on like paycheck or how much you make a month, how much your mortgage should be. But
sure, it's like 25% of your take home or of your gross pay, something like that. But it seems like it should be calculated on your net.
Whatever they tell us, we're not doing it. I say Lord. As we as like a community and as like a populace, we spend way more on rent than we should based on what we make.
Absolutely.
And so it would be better for the average person to Tanner and Ashlyn nodding like, the average person.
Sure. When you're spending 40 to 50% of your income on your rent, that doesn't leave much for anything else, right? I don't know. It's weird because I went to, my daughter got married last year. She's graduated from nursing school. Her husband is graduating with an engineering degree. They're moving to Arkansas. And the town where they're moving to has no rental housing. There's just very little of anything. And they kind of have the same sort of housing market we have, where there's very little even housing stock to buy. Anyway, she goes to the lender to get pre-qualified just based on his income. And, you got to understand, this is it's a nice salary because it's an engineer's salary, but it's still a guy first year out of college, right? She said, how much do we qualify for? They said $300,000. She almost fainted. It's crazy, the idea that as a kid fresh out of college, that someone would give you $300,000 to buy a house. And she's sitting there going, yeah, I guess we could make that, but then we couldn't ever do anything else. We'd be struggling it just freaked them out. However, with interest rates being really low right now, that does bring house payments down a bit. So, when they were looking at it, you could right now, it looks like, swing a house that costs between $150,000 and $200,000 for around $1,000 a month, which is pretty equivalent to what you would pay for that type of house. Actually, it's cheaper than what you would pay to rent that type of house here in Stillwater.
Right. And
so
a lot of Stillwater rentals are per room rentals. I think you touched on that a little bit too. So.
Which makes it crazy expensive. I mean, a house that, would have been worth like $850 to $1,000 now rents for $450 to $550 a bedroom. So now they're, banking like $1,500, $1,600 a month off this, it is
makes
nuts.
It easier for the landlord.
Right. Like the last time I had roommates, which was about 4 years ago, even with 3 other people, and this was like a brand new house when we moved in, but like I was paying more there for 1/4 of the rent that I'm paying currently for my rent now for a single.
Live by yourself.
To live by myself, it's basically cheaper to live by myself in terms of like what that rent was. So
sure.
So just the thought of that is kind of mind blowing to me. So
yeah.
When you think about the concept of multiple roommates, it usually makes it cheaper. But
well, yeah, the idea is you buy you rent the house and then you can split it 3 or 4 ways,
exactly.
And it makes it really cheap for everybody. And that's just not the case anymore. I think the landlords have figured out a way to work around that where it's to their advantage and not to the renter's advantage. Definitely. Anyway, the housing market is really something, and we know that it's expensive. We know rents I always think of that Keenan, the rent's too high thing, on Saturday Night Live. But I do think that whenever I think of Stillwater's rental market, it does seem that way. And a lot of people are struggling with that right now. I mean, the COVID did have a big impact on people, whether you had medical bills, whether you lost wages and got behind and never have been quite able to get caught up, because we know that if you're not making a lot of money, once you get behind, you're just on that treadmill. And it's really hard to ever get to the point where you're not behind on something. So the city has implemented a couple of programs to help with that. They allocated $150,000 of CARES Act funding in December. That was given out in January, and that helped with rent, mortgages, utility bills, up to $1,500. They managed to help, I think, like 146 different households because not everyone needed the full $1,500. Now they've gotten more money through the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's a federal program. This is a little more limited because it's coming from the federal government. It's got some more strings attached to it. So you've got, you've got income guidelines. Basically, you have to meet the definition of being low to moderate income, which is actually surprisingly generous. For one household, it's more than $30,000. For a family of 4, it's $40-some thousand. So it's not really based on like the poverty line,
poverty threshold,
level, as many other things are. But it's only going to help with rent and utilities. Again, the payments are made directly to the person you owe the money to. You have to show that you're behind, and you have to show that you suffered a hardship, basically, that you lost income or you had extra expenses because of COVID-19. And if you can demonstrate that, there is a program now to help you out. And and this one, I mean, the federal government allows them to cover up to 6 months of bills. So theoretically, if you were 6 months behind on your electric bill and you'd been in that grace period that the city of Stillwater offered where they were not going to terminate your electric service for non-payment, this could help make you whole. Now, we don't know if the final program is going to allow that full 6 months or if they're going to put a dollar amount ceiling on it, because they're also looking at ways to make it stretch as far as possible and help as many people as possible. And the program is not taking applications yet as of right now while we're speaking. Hopefully by the time this comes out, they will be. But anyway, I'll definitely have a follow-up on that as it comes out and what the firm limits are on that. But anyway, there is some help out there. So if people are struggling, they definitely need to check into this. And it's through our Daily Bread Food and Resource Center.
Right. We'll probably have more information when it comes out of where you apply,
yes,
when you apply, that kind of thing.
I do kind of wonder what's going to happen to all of us when all this sweet, sweet federal money quits flowing and we have to go back to normal.
At some point, don't stop writing checks. But
yes.
I would say this wasn't just a blank check from the CARES Act. This was something they had to ask for and were granted.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
So this latest thing, so.
Absolutely.
There is that. There does mean there are people within the city, who know where to find these things.
Oh, absolutely. I just think that there are extra sources of funding right now, and at some point those are going to dry up.
Sure will. Yeah.
Yeah.
People will, say, hey, you can't just print money, federal government, right?
It's going to happen at some point.
Get plenty of that. Yeah. We know that's going to happen. Ash, what's going on?
Oh, nothing.
Nah.
That is so not true.
Nothing. Just didn't do anything all week.
Slacking. What did you write about, Ashlyn?
Well, my favorite story of the week was probably the one on Todd and Angie Adams. And Todd is the executive director at Teen Challenge, and Angie manages the super thrift store, and she deals with financials for Teen Challenge. And
Teen Challenge is it's a program for people who have been addicted.
Yeah, who have drug addiction issues, and then usually it's court mandated. They can go to prison, jail, or they can also go to Teen Challenge.
But this is like a 12-month residential program, right? I mean, this isn't something where it's like outpatient. This is a residential program.
Yeah, it's inpatient, yeah.
You stay for a long time.
Yeah, 12 months.
It isn't limited to teenagers, although it's called Teen Challenge.
They actually call it Teen and Adult Challenge here, I think. But the overall organization is Teen Challenge. How did they come to be involved with Teen Challenge? How did they get into this?
Well, Todd has a family member who is involved in Teen Challenge. And one day, his mom, when he was going through drug addiction, basically said, "Son, I can't help you anymore." And because they had a family member who was involved in Teen Challenge, he went through several different Teen Challenges, he said. He started in Florida, or maybe that's where he ended up. He went to one in Phoenix and Florida for sure. And then he said it took him 24 months to complete drug program because he was a knucklehead, was his quote.
Okay.
So, but the thing is, the story that printed, there was so much more that I wanted to include. Their story was so powerful, but I just didn't have enough room to include all of it. And so that's kind of the downside of it, is there was so much more I wanted to include.
What would you have put in? What do you wish you could have included?
I wish I could have expanded more on Angie's story. And then some of the things that, like she said, when she went through a rehab program, her husband divorced her. And so when she left rehab, she had nobody. She didn't have her husband. She didn't have her kids. And it kind of brought her back into the cycle of addiction again. And so she said that she didn't have anybody, and she had been married for 15 years, and she had to start all the way over with nobody, which didn't help the drug addiction she had. And, you know, her addiction started because she had a surgery and they gave her painkillers. And then she got addicted to the painkillers, which is something a lot of people deal with.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
It is, yes. And, you know, Todd, there was a lot that I want to include on his. Like, he told me a story that on 9/11, he was so high that he thought he was watching a movie. He didn't know that it was real. And then when he found out, he was devastated. And they were genuinely very nice people.
It sounds like they were really forthcoming, too.
Oh, yes.
You're right. I mean,
they didn't hold back anything, which is genuinely what I like in these kind of stories, because you want the raw detail and the emotion and everything behind it, because you don't want it to be a fluff piece. Like, yes, they went through addiction and they made it out the other end, but addiction isn't just what's at the end. Todd said he relapsed several times, and then he tells his guys, you know, relapse is part of it. Don't try to be perfect, because you're not going to be perfect. It's a day-to-day accomplishment to stay sober. And so he said he doesn't even count how many days he's sober, because if you get that number in your head, then it can kind of just mess things up.
But how successful do they think they are with keeping people out of prison, not going back, or not, or not using again, and in a way that leads to prison,
I don't know the statistics that he gave, but he did say that if someone comes into the program and they don't want to get sober, they're not going to get sober. You can't get sober for other people. But if you do come and you want to do the program, then it's, pretty successful.
It sort of seems like the program, because it is so long, because you're there inpatient for 12 months, that would give you enough time to maybe break some old habits, change some ways of thinking. It just seems like a shorter program. It would be easy to kind of dry out for a while, and then you go back out, and then you're around the same people, or you have the same triggers or whatever, and then you're right back where you started. That maybe something like this, which pulls you out of your life temporarily, but for a long period of time, could, I don't know, it seems like it could help you to maybe restructure things a little bit. But you still have to go out in the world at some point, right?
Yeah, and at that point, Todd talked about the importance of having your family there, because if you leave and you go back out and you don't have anybody there, how easy is it going to be to fall back? I'm lonely, I'm sad, I don't have anybody here. Oh, there's my pal from a year ago. And then you fall back into the same circle. So he really stressed on having a support system too. And, COVID's kind of shut a lot of things down for them, but he's hoping to open up Family Day again so that families can come and see everybody.
Yeah, I don't think we've fully seen the impact COVID had, especially on things like treatment and addiction. Especially if you required a support system. If you're used to going into a meeting a week or something. Who knows? That stuff that's not something you're going to hear about right away. That's probably something a few years down the line we're going to learn more about. But I mentioned last week, I was going to talk this week a little bit about managed care and expanded Medicaid, because I spoke with Denise Weber, CEO of Stillwater Medical. And yeah, I think now as I'm speaking, that interview will already be in the newspaper. I'm doing one of these weird track back things. But she also mentioned something about, to them, the pandemic kind of exposed just how connected hospitals are, right? And just how connected your healthcare system is. So they really need, it's not a competition for Stillwater Medical. They really need other rural hospitals to be open and, to be financially solvent. And they can't take people coming from, halfway across the state into Stillwater Medical. And she's saying, hospitals in Tulsa, in the metro, in the Oklahoma City, in the metros, they can't take it, they couldn't do that either. And so that's why they get real worried about when something tries to either shoot down Medicaid. In this case, managed care is, once Medicaid's expanded, which people voted on the Medicaid expansion, once it's expanded, then managed care would be to privatize its management with insurance companies. In this case, it's a very large out-of-state insurance company, for profit, and that's what a lot of people have an issue with.
So is the idea that it's going to take a bigger chunk of the money?
Well, I think the idea is that the real worry is that there's going to be a lot more rejected claims.
Okay.
Right? So you're going to have more rejected claims and more people falling through the cracks. So even though we've expanded it to cover another, 200,000 people or so, you're still going to get care that falls through the cracks. And when that happens, that's more pressure on hospitals. It's just this thing that sort of doesn't trickle down very well. Those expenses have to go somewhere. Stillwater Medical, they write off millions each year on that charity care, what they call it, which is essentially people who are delinquent,
right,
in payments. They just write it off.
Right.
But
well, when you think about it,
still expense though. Yeah.
Well, if the claims are getting denied, then either people are not getting the treatment they need,
right,
which might mean the condition gets worse, and then ultimately it's more expensive to treat. Or you're right, it gets pushed onto the local hospital, which then has to determine whether it's going to write off that cost or that care. It's so expensive. It's also expensive.
And the things they looked at, were, how this has gone in other states, and she was talking about the last time they tried it. Another thing is they worry that more physicians will decline to see these patients. And, when that happens, more people are out of network. You travel to find someone in your network, and, a concern they have is, are we going to get the care you need where you live? Can you do that? And, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows how it works? I'm sure there are. The argument is definitely to be made that with managed care there is money to be saved, but and you could say that there are people who are used to managing these things that maybe Oklahoma isn't, but I can definitely tell you that's what the worry from the medical community is, that there will be less care, more emergency type of care like you talked about, and just overall, that's their concern. But
sure.
Anyway.
So it's almost,
Right.
It would be almost sort of like a state HMO kind of thing, where you've got this management company that's really looking at the bottom line, trying to keep costs down, and then people have fewer options, is sort of the impression. I've had HMO insurance before, and luckily I was pretty young and healthy at the time and didn't have any problems with it. But you were pretty limited in where you could go. You had a pretty strict network. And you already see people in the community groups, on Facebook and in different places, looking for, say their kids are on Medicaid or something like that, looking for a doctor or a dentist that will accept Medicaid, and it's tough to find sometimes. So, I can see where this could squeeze availability.
All right. No other questions for me? Okay.
No, I think that's pretty good.
I think we'll call it an episode. Thank you for joining every time. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom.
To get in touch with Bo and the team, you can email editor@stwnewspress.com. You'll find links to the social media and any articles mentioned in the show notes. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time.